Ever get that feeling like, wow, college was a trip, emotionally speaking? I mean, all those deadlines, the pressure, maybe even a little bit of dread when finals week rolled around,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
definitely.
Well, get ready because today we're diving into the hidden emotional world of English majors.
Oh, interesting.
And trust me, you don't have to be a literature buff to relate to this.
Right, right.
Our source is this fascinating research paper with a really long title, but basically it's all about how English majors, how they actually feel about their education.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff because we often focus so much on grades, like as if that's the only thing that matters.
Totally, yeah.
But there's this whole emotional roller coaster happening beneath the surface, right? And this research really digs into that, especially for English majors.
Yeah, it's like everyone just assumes college is stressful, but this actually like breaks
Right.
down those feelings.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with understanding this whole like hidden emotional world?
Well, the researchers use this tool called the circumplex model of affect.
Okay.
Basically, imagine like a map of emotions.
Okay.
So you've got your happy, excited feelings on one side, and then like your sad and exhausted vibes on the other.
Okay. So they plotted student experiences on this map. Interesting.
Exactly. And by doing that, they started to see some pretty compelling patterns emerge.
So we're talking about English majors here, right? Like people often have this stereotype of them being, I don't know, like dreamy bookrooms or, the
Okay.
starving artist type. Where do they typically land on this map, this emotional map?
Yeah, well, that's where it gets really interesting. Obviously, there's a wide range of experiences, but the research found that a lot of English majors, they're dealing with this complex mix of pressure, right?
Mm.
Ambition, and even a sense of being misunderstood.
So it's not just the typical stress of like exams and deadlines,
Right.
but something like a deeper emotional layer at play.
Exactly. And you know what one of the most surprising findings was?
What's that?
The students with the higher GPAs, the ones who were like acing it, often reported lower overall well-being.
Really? That seems so counterintuitive. You'd think doing well would make you feel great.
Right. You would think that, wouldn't you?
So what's going on there?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The research suggests that for some high-achieving students, that constant pressure to keep those grades up, that striving for perfection, it can actually take a toll.
It's like they're on a treadmill.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
to keep running just to stay in the same place.
Exactly. Exactly. And another big thing the research highlighted?
What's that?
The role of expectations from others, especially those sky-high expectations that some students felt from their professors.
Oh, I could relate to that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like wanting to impress your professors. But isn't that just part of the challenge of, being in a challenging academic environment?
Sure, yeah.
Don't high expectations, like push students to excel.
Absolutely, they can. But I think this research really makes us think about that fine line between healthy encouragement, pushing you to do your best, and pressure that becomes detrimental.
Okay, yeah.
And remember, we're talking about a field, English literature, where feedback is often subjective. Interpretation is so important.
Right.
And that can make it even harder for students to feel confident, to feel secure in their abilities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because when your grade is based on someone else's opinion, it's really easy to internalize those critiques and start like doubting yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And we see
Yeah.
that reflected in some of the things the students actually said. Like one student said, "It is like we are the curse of the College of Arts."
Wow.
Imagine carrying that around with you.
Yeah.
That feeling that your field, your passion isn't as respected or valued as others.
No wonder they're on an emotional roller coaster, right?
Right.
I mean, they're dealing with this pressure to succeed, the subjective nature of their field, and then potentially even feeling like they're fighting for recognition.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's this constant battle, And many English majors talk about this battle against these external pressures, but also a struggle to find their own voice, their own confidence amidst all these expectations.
So it's not just about, sitting there analyzing Shakespeare. It's about proving yourself in a field that maybe doesn't always get the respect it deserves.
Exactly, exactly. And that's why understanding this whole emotional landscape is so crucial, because if we're only looking at grades, if we're only focused on the academic side, we miss this huge part of the student experience.
This is giving me a lot to think about, and we're just getting started. So we talked about all that pressure, those expectations, and feeling like maybe people don't get it, But this research also found something else about what it feels like to be an English major. And this one really hit home for me.
You're talking about burnout.
Exactly. It's not just, oh, I got to get this done, got to get a good grade. sometimes you just hit a wall. You know what I
I
mean?
do.
Like that passion you had, it kind of fades out and it's just a ton of work, you know? And the study found that exhaustion, boredom, those are like major roadblocks for these students.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, those feelings, people brush them aside a lot in academia. But burnout is real, you know? It's a real thing. And it's connected to everything we've been talking about, these emotional experiences. Think back to that map, that circumplex model.
Mhm.
Exhaustion, disengagement. That's right there in the sadness and apathy zone.
It's like saying it's okay to admit that even the things you love can sometimes feel like a chore.
Exactly. And this research really highlights how dangerous it is to ignore those feelings, that feeling of just going through the motions, you know? Chronic boredom, it can be a sign that something bigger's going on, you know?
Yeah.
Dissatisfaction.
And it can lead to being totally burned out.
Yeah.
Which, think about it, goes back to that whole war thing that some students mentioned.
Mhm.
They're battling all this pressure from outside,
Yeah.
their own doubts on the inside, and now maybe even their own excitement is fading out. That's rough.
It is. It really is. And it makes this one point so clear. You can't just power through exhaustion or losing interest, you know? It just doesn't work long term. In fact, it can actually backfire on you.
So then what do you do? How do you keep students from getting to that point, that burnout point? Especially in a field like English Lit, which is demanding.
Well, I think part of it, and this is a big part, is changing how we think about it all. Instead of seeing these negative emotions, you know, like their weaknesses, we got to see them as information.
Okay.
They're telling us something important about, you know, our connection with what we're studying.
So instead of just saying, try harder, we need to actually listen to what those feelings are trying to tell us, like why we're burned out.
Yes, exactly. Maybe you need to step back, rethink what you want to get out of this, or find a new way to connect with the material, you know?
And this is where it gets really fascinating because the research points to this one thing, this behavior pattern that can lead to burnout, and it's called avoidance goals.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Basically, the study found that a lot of students, their main motivation was fear of failing, instead of a desire to learn and grow.
So it's less, man, I really want to understand this. It's more, I just don't want to flunk this class.
Exactly. And it seems like a small difference, but research shows that always focusing on what you don't want, it actually can make you more anxious.
Oh, interesting.
And that can lead right to burnout.
It's like you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know, instead of looking at where you want to go.
You got it. That's a great way to put it. And it makes sense if you're always worried about messing up, you're not going to take as many risks. Try new things, really get into the learning.
And isn't that what you need in English?
Mm-hmm.
Especially English.
Right.
So how do we get students out of that cycle, the avoidance and fear? How do we make learning healthier? You know, something that can last.
Well, that's where understanding the emotional side of learning is so important. We can't just tell students, be more positive or don't be scared of failing. It doesn't work that way. We need to create the kind of environment that supports how they feel, you know, their well-being emotionally.
So what does that look like? What can we actually do? What steps can teachers and schools take to create that kind of supportive environment?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's something that we're going to really dig into in the next part of our deep dive.
So we've talked about some of the tough stuff, the pressures, the
Yeah.
burnout, being afraid to fail,
Mm-hmm.
but just knowing about it, that's not enough, right? So how do we actually make things better for these students? For anyone who's trying to learn and grow, how do we create an experience that feels supportive?
Yeah, we got to move from understanding to action. And this is where it gets exciting because we can actually design these learning environments where people can grow intellectually but also feel good emotionally.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, remember those students who talked about feeling stuck, overwhelmed? A lot of times that comes from not having enough control, not enough freedom in how they learn.
Right, like being told what to think, how to think all the time. I can see how that would be overwhelming.
Exactly. So one thing we can do is offer more choices, more flexibility in the curriculum.
Okay.
Even small things like letting students pick essay topics they're actually interested in or giving them some say in how they're graded.
Yeah, when students feel like they have a voice, like they're in the driver's seat, it can totally change how motivated they are.
Totally. And here's something else, maybe even more important. We need to build a culture of honesty where it's okay to be vulnerable, where students can talk about their struggles without feeling judged.
That makes me think about what you said earlier about normalizing those feelings, right?
Yeah.
Not pretending everything's perfect, admitting that challenges are part of it all.
Exactly. Imagine a classroom where it's okay to say, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I just can't connect with this. When we make that safe space, it takes away the shame, the feeling of being alone in those tough emotions.
So we're really talking about changing the whole culture of learning, right?
Yes.
It's not just adding a workshop here or there. It's about creating a community that cares about how students feel as much as what they achieve.
You got it. And that shift has to happen everywhere, from individual teachers to how the whole school is run. We have to ask ourselves, are we putting grades ahead of actually learning? Are we rewarding people for being perfect instead of taking risks, trying new things?
Tough questions, but important ones. Because if we want students to be successful, not just in school but in life, we need to give them the tools to deal with the tough stuff that life throws at them.
Absolutely. Tools like self-awareness, resilience, being able to ask for help, and being okay with failing sometimes. Those are the things that will help them, not just in class, but everywhere.
This has been an amazing deep dive.
Yeah.
We started with English majors, but honestly what we found, it applies to anyone who's learning.
And that's what I find so fascinating. These findings, yeah, they come from English majors, but they show us something true about learning in general, no matter what you're into, whether it's books or black holes. We all learn best, we grow best when our emotional needs are met.
So for our listeners out there getting ready to graduate, what's the one thing you hope they take away from all of this?
Pay attention to how you feel. Don't ignore those feelings. Don't think they're bad. Your emotions, they're trying to tell you something. They're like a guide, pointing you towards what you need, what's important to you, your own unique path. Listen to them and you'll unlock so much potential for yourself, for your career, for everything.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the emotional world of learning. And to everyone listening, until next time, happy exploring.